I'll never forget the sound of my mother's pen scratching across that paper. Each stroke felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. She was signing away everything my father had built, our family home, his life savings, his legacy, to a man who'd slept in our house for less than a year. My father's body was barely cold in the ground, and she'd already replaced him. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent 3 months uncovering who this man really was. And the truth? It was so much darker than I ever imagined. I was there when my father died. Not just in the building, but in the room, right next to him. The monitors around his bed did that soft, annoying beeping, the nurses saying, "He's stable," while their eyes said something else. The air smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. My mother was asleep in the corner chair after 3 nights of pretending she didn't need rest. For a few minutes, it was just the two of us. His hand felt small. That was the first thing that scared me. My whole life, his hands had been big and rough and warm, the kind that could carry lumber, fix wiring, sign paychecks. That hand used to guide mine when he showed me how to read a balance sheet. Now the skin slid a little over bone. He squeezed my fingers anyway. Not hard, just enough to say he was still there. "Hey," I whispered, leaning in so Mom wouldn't wake up. "You're supposed to stick around, remember? You still haven't taught me how to deal with the tax guy on my own." He actually smiled. It softened the lines around his eyes. "You don't need me for that," he said, voice thin but clear. "You've been handling more than you think, kiddo." I swallowed, because I knew what was coming. We'd been circling around it for weeks. The business. The house. The paperwork we kept pretending we'd talk about, when you're feeling stronger. He took a breath that sounded like it cost him something. "Listen to me," he said. "I need you to hear this. All of it." I pulled the chair closer and nodded. "Everything I built," he said slowly, like he was spending the last of his energy on each word, "the house, the shop, the savings, it's not just money. You know that." I did know. I'd grown up in that shop, doing homework at the metal desk in his office while he worked late, learning numbers off invoices instead of worksheets. He squeezed my fingers again. "I put your name on things for a reason," he went on. "Not because you're my only kid. Because you're the one who understands what it is. What it cost. What it's supposed to do for this family." My throat burned. I cleared it, trying to answer like an adult and not the little girl who used to sit on his toolbox and swing her legs. "I know, Dad," I said. "I'll take care of Mom. I'll take care of the shop. I'll keep it running the way you wanted." He shook his head, just a little. "Taking care of your mother doesn't mean giving her whatever she asks for," he said. "Your mother's heart is big. Too big. She believes every sob story. That's why I put it all in writing." His eyes shifted past me, toward the window. "She's too trusting," he whispered. "If someone comes along after I'm gone, if she starts handing things over, you have to be the one who says no. Even if she gets mad. Especially if she gets mad." My chest tightened. We'd never said it out loud before, that there could be someone after. In our house, my parents were just my parents. A team. The idea of another man in that kitchen felt wrong, like imagining a stranger sleeping in my old bedroom. "Dad," I said gently, "you and Mom have been together for 35 years. She's not going to just," he cut me off with a look. "Calm. Dead serious. You promise me," he said. "Not just that you'll do your best. Promise me you'll protect what I built. Protect her from herself, if you have to." There was no way to say no to him. Not then. Not with the 4 lines, the oxygen, and the knowledge that this might be the last real conversation we'd ever have. "I promise," I said. "I'll protect it. I'll protect her. I won't let anyone take what you worked for." His shoulders relaxed like I'd taken a weight off them. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again and really looked at me. Not as my little girl, not as the teenager he taught to drive in the empty lot behind the shop. As the person he was leaving in charge. "You were never the son people thought I needed," he said quietly. "You were better. You listened. You paid attention. You saw the whole picture. That's what this needs." I'd heard comments my whole life, the subtle ones from customers, the jokes at family gatherings. "Shame he doesn't have a boy to take over. Maybe one day you'll marry a man who can run the place, huh?" Dad always brushed them off with a shrug and "I've got a daughter who can run circles around most men I know," but hearing him say it here, now, like this, it landed differently. It wasn't just dad pride. It was a transfer of responsibility. I nodded, blinking back tears so they wouldn't blur his face. "Okay," I said. "Then that's what I'll do." His breathing got rougher after that. The nurses slipped in and out. Mom woke up and took his other hand, and there were more quiet words, memories that still feel too private to repeat out loud. But that promise, that stuck. I walked out of that hospital a few days later with a funeral to plan, a business to keep afloat, a mother whose world had just been blown apart. And a sentence echoing in my head on loop, protect what I built. Don't let her give it away. At the time, I thought he meant the obvious stuff, the house with the sagging porch he kept fixing every spring, the shop with his name above the door and my initials quietly next to his on the paperwork, the savings he'd built from zero with overtime and missed vacations. I thought my job would be about numbers. Asset lists. Legal documents. I had no idea the real danger wasn't some random scammer on the phone, or a pushy salesman, or a bad investment. I had no idea the threat would walk into our lives smiling, carrying homemade cookies from Mom's book club, calling her sweetheart, and telling her she deserved to be happy again. Back then, all I knew was grief and paperwork. I buried my father, opened his files, and started doing what we always did together, taking stock. The business books still balanced. The mortgage was manageable. The retirement accounts were intact. On paper, at least, everything he'd built was still there. I didn't see, yet, how quickly it could be put in someone else's hands. Instead, I opened the door and heard a man's laugh coming from the kitchen. Not my father's. A different laugh. Lower, smoother, like he'd practiced it. I froze in the hallway for a second, then stepped in. He was standing at the stove like he belonged there, sleeves rolled up, stirring something in one of my mother's old pots. He turned when he heard me and hit me with a warm, practiced smile. You must be her daughter, he said. Your mom's told me all about you. My mother appeared behind him with 2 wine glasses in her hands. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes brighter than I'd seen them since the funeral. Oh good, you're here, she said. This is Richard. He's from my book club. I told you about him, remember? He's going through a rough divorce. Book club, rough divorce, sympathy preloaded. He wiped his hand on a dish towel and reached out to shake mine. It's really nice to finally meet you, he said. Your mother's been bragging about you. She says you're the brains behind the business now. On paper, it was a compliment. In his mouth, it felt like he was putting me in a neat little box and closing the lid. I stayed for dinner. Walking out would have made me look petty, and I didn't want to be the sulking daughter who couldn't handle Mom having a friend. He'd brought over a casserole he just threw together, the kind that somehow involved 3 different cheeses and herbs my mother never bought. Mom set the table like it was a small holiday. We did the small talk dance. He asked about my work. He complimented the house, the furniture, the framed photo of my dad on the wall. Your father had excellent taste, he said, studying the picture. You can tell when a man built a life with intention. My mother glowed at that. Her shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. He'd found the exact sentence that would land. Between bites, he told a few stories about his terrible ex and how hard divorce had been. How he'd lost so much but was learning to trust again. He asked my mom gentle questions about dad, about their marriage, about how they met. He listened. He nodded in the right places. He touched her hand at the exact moment her voice broke. It was skillful. Too skillful. On the drive home, I tried to talk myself down. He's just a friend. She's lonely. Everyone keeps telling her to get out of the house. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe I was just being territorial. That was the first red flag, the way I immediately started defending him to myself instead of trusting my gut. He went from friend from book club to regular guest in about 3 weeks. Every time I stopped by, he was there. Fixing a squeaky cabinet door. Carrying in groceries. Changing light bulbs that didn't really need changing. Richard's very handy, my mom would say, watching him with a little smile. Your father was never good with this kind of thing. That one stung. My father had built half that house with his own hands. He might not have installed designer fixtures, but he knew how to keep the roof from leaking. One night, I walked into the living room and found Richard sprawled on the couch with a stack of mail on the coffee table. He had my mother's reading glasses on, flipping through envelopes. What are you doing? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Oh, just helping your mom sort some of this stuff, he said lightly. She gets overwhelmed with all the paperwork. We were talking about simplifying things, going paperless, maybe consolidating a few accounts so they're easier to manage. My mom popped her head in from the kitchen. He's been such a help, she said. You know how your father was with bills, everything in separate files, different logins? I just can't keep up. I sat down across from them, forcing a smile. I can help with that, I said. Dad walked me through most of it. We can sit down this weekend and Richard lifted his hands like he was surrendering, still smiling. Hey, I don't want to step on your toes, he said. I just know a thing or two about financial planning, and your mom kept saying how busy you are. You deserve a life too, you know. He turned to her, dropping his voice into that soft, concerned tone. You should have some boundaries with her, he told her. You're allowed to have a private life. She doesn't have to be involved in every little thing. The word boundaries landed with a thud. My mother looked at me, almost apologetic. He's right, she said quietly. You work so much. I don't want you to feel like you have to carry me on top of everything else. It's okay if I have someone else to lean on. Heat rushed to my face. That's not what I'm saying, I said. I'm not trying to carry you. Dad trusted me with this stuff. He wanted me to help. Richard let out a soft chuckle. Of course he did, he said. You're very competent. It's impressive. But your mother doesn't need a therapist or a manager. She needs companionship. Emotional support. That's all. My mother's eyes flickered. You're not my therapist, she said, and there was an edge there I hadn't heard before. I just want you to be happy for me. The room went quiet. A dozen things crowded my tongue, that I was happy she wasn't alone, that I was scared, not controlling, that none of this felt right. Instead, I swallowed it. I told myself I'd bring it up later, just the two of us. That was mistake number 2. He moved in temporarily after that. There was a story about his lease ending, how his apartment was a mess with a divorce, how it would only be for a little while. I told him he could stay in the guest room, Mom said over the phone. It just makes sense financially. And it's nice having someone in the house. It feels less empty. The first time I saw his suitcase in the hallway, the realization hit, he wasn't leaving. Not soon. His toothbrush appeared in the bathroom cup next to my mother's. His jacket on the coat rack by the front door. His shoes lined up neatly beside her slippers. Little, quiet claims on space my father used to fill. One afternoon, when he was out running errands, I sat at the kitchen table with my mom. Do you think this is fast? I asked carefully. She stirred her coffee, eyes fixed on the mug. What do you mean? She asked. With Richard, I said. Him moving in. You've known him, what, 2 months? A muscle in her jaw tightened. So, she said. We spend a lot of time together. Grief group, book club, church. It's not like we just met on the street.
I know, I said. It's just, Dad's been gone less than a year. And now there's a man living in his house. Going through his mail. Helping you with the finances. That's a big deal. She set the spoon down a little too hard. I am aware your father is gone, she said. I was there. I was married to him for 35 years. I don't need you to remind me. That's not what I'm sure single. She cut in. You're focused on work. You don't understand what it is to be alone at this age. To go to sleep in a bed that feels twice as big and 4 times as cold. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed sharp. Richard is kind to me, she went on. He's here when I wake up. He makes coffee. He listens. And all you seem to see are red flags. Because there were red flags. Because every time I came over, he was a little more embedded in our life. I don't only see red flags, I said quietly. I see someone sliding into Dad's place very fast. I see someone who suddenly has a lot of opinions about your money. God, there it is, she snapped. The money, always the money. Maybe I just want someone to sit with me on the couch and watch TV. Did you ever think of that? The woman who'd always apologized for buying herself a new winter coat now looked at me like I was the greedy one. Mom, that's not fair, I said. You know that's not what this is. Do I? She shot back. Because lately, every time you come over, it's to check up on something. The bills, the deed, the business. Maybe I just want you to visit me, not audit me. There it was. His language, coming out of her mouth. The shift with the finances started small. A grocery run where he insisted on paying. A casual, I'll go with you to the bank. Those forms can be confusing. A suggestion that they combine a few little accounts. So Mom didn't have to track so many logins. One afternoon, I came over to help her sort the filing cabinet like we'd planned. Instead of chaos, there was a neat stack of stamped envelopes on the counter. What's this? I asked, flipping through them. Oh, we switched some things over, she said, busy at the sink. Richard said it was silly to have 3 different savings accounts. One good joint account is easier. Joint, I repeated, as in, you and him. She hesitated, just for a second. It's just for day-to-day stuff, she said quickly. Groceries, utilities, it makes sense. He's contributing, you know. He pays for things. I looked at the envelopes again.
These weren't grocery accounts. These were where my father had parked money for decades. Did you talk to Mr. Henderson about this? I asked. How it fits with the estate plan Dad set up. Her shoulders stiffened. I don't need a lawyer to tell me how to use my own money, she said. Your father isn't here anymore. I am. And Richard has experience with investments. He's been really helpful. You should be grateful. I found out how far it had gone by accident. I walked into the bank one day to make a business deposit. As I was filling out the slip, I glanced toward the offices in the back. Through the glass, I saw my mother and Richard sitting side by side at a desk with a representative. He had his hand on the back of her chair, leaning in close, pointing at something on the screen. She was nodding along. For a second, I just stood there, pen frozen over the paper, watching a stranger talk through numbers that used to be between me, her, and my dad. Our eyes met through the glass. There was a flicker of guilt, or maybe embarrassment, and then she looked away. Later, when I brought it up, she waved it off. You're busy, she said. You have the shop. I don't want to drag you to every appointment. Richard was with me, that's all. It's not a big deal. But it was. Because those appointments weren't just about utilities or cable bills. They were about the structure my father had built so carefully. And somehow, without me seeing the exact moment it happened, being helpful had turned into being a co-manager of her life. The email about the lawyers' meeting came on a Tuesday. Subject line, Estate Clarification, Meeting Request. Sender, Mr. Henderson's office. It looked routine. A follow-up to make sure everything was in order after probate. I skimmed it at my desk between orders, saw my mom's name CC'd, saw the familiar address, and felt a quiet wave of relief. Good, I thought. We'll get everything squared away. Maybe I'm overreacting. I took the afternoon off and drove to Henderson and Associates, the same office where my dad had signed documents for 20 years. Same parking lot. Same faded sign. Same receptionist with the candy bowl on her desk. For a minute, I could almost pretend this was just paperwork. Just a formality. I was wrong. When I walked into the conference room, my mother was already there. So was Richard. He sat close beside her at the long mahogany table, his hand wrapped over hers, thumb rubbing slow circles like they were in a commercial for retirement cruises. My mother's face was tense but composed. She didn't quite meet my eyes. Good to see you, Mr. Henderson said, standing to shake my hand. He looked older, more tired. Deeper grooves around his mouth. Thank you all for coming. We sat. My mother between us. Me on her right, Richard on her left. The imbalance was physical, not just emotional. Before we begin, Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses and shuffling papers, I need to inform you that there have been changes to the estate plan since we last spoke. My stomach dropped. Changes? I asked. What kind of changes? He slid a thin folder across the table toward me. Inside was a document with a heading I will never forget, Amended Last Will and Testament. The date under the heading was recent. Too recent. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. My father's old structure was there in the background, but layered over it was something else entirely. Fresh signatures. Fresh terms. Your mother has decided to exercise her rights as surviving spouse, Mr. Henderson said carefully. His voice had that strained politeness lawyers use when they know someone is about to get hurt. The primary assets of the estate are being placed into a joint trust between her and her husband. I looked up, slowly. Her what? Richard squeezed her hand and smiled. We were going to tell you, he said. We just wanted to avoid making a big fuss. We got married last week. Very small, private ceremony. My vision tunneled. You got married, I repeated. Last week. My mother finally met my eyes. There was a flicker of something, guilt maybe, but it hardened quickly. It was my decision, she said. I didn't want a big wedding. I didn't want people judging me. I knew you wouldn't understand. You didn't even invite me, I said. I'm your daughter. You got married and I found out from a legal document. Richard leaned forward, his smile sharpening. It was a private ceremony, he said. Your mother wanted something intimate. No drama. And frankly, you've been nothing but hostile since the day we met. Your mother deserves to move forward with her life without your constant judgment. I turned to Mr. Henderson. Can you explain exactly what this joint trust means? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. He folded his hands. In brief, he said, your mother, as surviving spouse, has broad discretion over the marital assets. She has chosen to create a joint revocable trust, naming herself and Mr. Blake as co-trustees and primary beneficiaries. Upon her death, the remaining assets would then be distributed according to the terms of the trust. Meaning, I said slowly, as long as she's alive, he has access to everything my father worked for. Richard gave a small shrug. It's perfectly legal, he said. It protects her interests. If something happens to her, I can handle things. Make sure she's not taken advantage of by anyone. He didn't have to say it. The implication hung there. I looked at my mother. Dad made me promise, I said, feeling my voice crack. He asked me to protect what he built. For you. For this family. He put my name on things because he trusted me. This was supposed to be, your father is gone, she cut in. I am still here. Richard is my husband now. He is family. You need to accept that. Family. And somehow, I had become the problem. I walked out of that office with a thin folder of paper. And a hollow feeling where my place in the family used to be. I thought, in that moment, that I'd already failed my father. I hadn't. I just hadn't realized yet that the promise was about to turn into a war. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, the Amended will on the passenger seat, and realizing my hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key into the ignition. My father's signature stared up at me from that paper, familiar and wrong at the same time, like someone had used his handwriting to say something he'd never say. The drive home is a blur of traffic lights and white noise. What I remember clearly is that night. I didn't sleep. I lay on my couch with the folder open on the coffee table, reading the same lines over and over. My mother's name. Richard's name. Joint revocable trust. Co-trustees. Surviving spouse. Every term that was supposed to protect her now felt like a loaded weapon pointed at my father's legacy. Around 3 a.m, I got up and made coffee. Not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed my hands to do something besides ripping the papers in half. The rage burned hot, then burned out. Under it, something colder showed up. My dad's voice. Not literally, but that sentence he drilled into me when I was a teenager, feelings are loud. Paper is quiet. Courts listen to paper. He said it when people didn't want contracts, when relatives said, "We don't need it written, we're family." He'd tap the file cabinet and say, "You want protection? You put it in writing." Sitting there in my dark living room, I realized I'd been doing the opposite with my mother. I'd been arguing feelings, "This doesn't feel right, it's too fast, I'm worried about you," and all she heard was judgment and control. She was drowning in grief and whatever fantasy Richard was selling her. My words bounced off like rain on glass. That's when it clicked: if emotions couldn't reach her, maybe evidence could. If she wouldn't listen to my feelings, maybe, just maybe, she'd listen to the paper. I looked at the amended will again, really looked this time. At the dates. At the order of signatures. At the clauses that quietly gutted the protections my father had set up. The wedding date. The trust date. The date the original terms stopped meaning what he wanted them to mean. It was all so neat. Too neat. If Richard was just some guy who happened to fall in love with a grieving widow, then this was reckless and selfish, but maybe only that. But if he'd done this before, if there was a pattern, that was a different story. And patterns leave traces. It's amazing how much you can find with nothing but a name, a county website, and insomnia. I started with the scraps I remembered, the city he mentioned when he complained about his old commute, the way he joked that his last house was tied up in the divorce, the casual drop of the word settlement. I typed his full name into the court records search bar and hit enter. At first it felt like fishing in ink, case numbers, filing dates, half-sealed documents. Then I saw it: Blake, Richard A. versus Blake, Susan M. Dissolution of marriage, 3 years ago. I opened the docket and started reading. Buried in the property settlement, her premarital house had been reassigned, equity pulled out, new debt layered on. When it was over, he walked away with cash. She walked away with a mortgage she hadn't had before. I wrote down her name, Susan. Then I widened the search to other years, other counties. Another hit: Blake, Richard A. versus Mitchell, Sarah E. 8 years ago. A note about business asset valuation dispute. Her family business, jointly managed, restructured, expanded credit lines, then liquidation and sale. On paper it looked fair, but if you understood debt, it was a slow bleed in his favor. I wrote her down too: Sarah, Mitchell family flooring. I ran his name again. Different state. Another divorce: Hartwell, Jennifer. Real property, rental units, and investment portfolio. Widow. Inherited business. Property owner. Over and over, the same shape appearing in different files. Women who had lost husbands or fathers. Assets that had been in their family long before him. A marriage. A reorganization. Then, like clockwork, value bleeding out of their accounts into his. No forged signatures. No cartoon heists. Just pressure toward joint accounts, simplifying, "Let me handle that." If I hadn't grown up next to a file cabinet, I might have missed it. Instead, I sat in my dark living room and felt my father's lessons click into place like a lock engaging. This wasn't just a bad boyfriend. This was a business model. And my mother was lined up as his next client. Once I started digging, I couldn't stop. Marriage certificates. Quitclaim deeds. Loan documents where his name appeared out of nowhere. Every time I thought, okay, that's enough to prove what he is, I'd stumble onto something else. I printed everything until my printer complained. My living room turned into a low-budget investigation board. Papers spread over the coffee table and floor. Case numbers on sticky notes. Timelines scrawled across a legal pad. Names circled, connected, underlined. I wasn't just looking for proof he was bad, I was looking for the words the law used for him. Financial exploitation. Undue influence. Elder abuse. The fact those phrases existed, neat and tidy, meant there were enough of him out there to justify categories. But staring at documents wasn't enough. These weren't just files. They were people who'd been burned the way my mother was about to be. I didn't want to turn them into exhibits without at least trying to hear one of them. So I started with Sarah. Her forwarding address was buried deep in a filing. I used it to find a phone number and stared at my screen, thumb hovering over the call button, feeling ridiculous and desperate at the same time. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, you don't know me, but I think the man who wrecked your life is about to wreck my mother's. Can we compare notes?" I called anyway. First time, no answer. Second time, a tired voice: "Hello?" I swallowed and asked, "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" "Who's asking?" she said. "My name is Emily," I answered. "I'm sorry to bother you. I think we might have someone in common." There was a beat of silence. I forced the name out. "Richard Blake." The silence changed. You can hear someone's jaw clench through the phone if you listen closely. "What about him?" she asked, voice going flat. "He's with my mother," I said. "She's widowed. He moved in. He's helpful. Charming. Talking a lot about simplifying her finances." There was a bitter, humorless laugh on the other end. "Yeah," she said. "That sounds about right." Over the next 20 minutes she told me her version. He met her at church after her father died. He showed up with groceries when she said she was too tired to cook. He told her she was too smart to be alone, that she deserved a partner who understood business, and she believed him. "He made me feel alive again," she said. "Then he made me feel like I was crazy for asking where my money was going. Every time I brought up the accounts, he said I was paranoid, that I didn't trust him, that I was ruining what we had. She paused, and I could hear her swallow. By the time I realized what he was doing, she went on, he'd already moved most of my assets into places with his name attached. My lawyer said we could fight, maybe claw some of it back, but it would cost more than I'd recover. And I was just tired. I asked how much she lost. She gave a small, sharp laugh. Everything that mattered, she said. The business. The building my dad paid cash for in '82. The retirement I thought I had. I kept the shame and the debt. He kept the money and moved on. I closed my eyes, feeling sick for a woman I'd never met. I'm so sorry, I said. It sounded useless even as it left my mouth. Don't be, she replied. Just don't let him do it to your mother. Her voice shifted when she said that. For the first time she didn't sound exhausted. She sounded dangerous, like someone who had nothing left to lose. I'll testify if I have to, she added. I kept everything. Emails, statements, all of it. My lawyer said one day it might matter if he pulled this on someone else. I looked around at my own chaos of paper and thought, yeah, it's starting to matter. We were pieces of the same story. When I hung up, my hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't helplessness. It was adrenaline. I wasn't just some paranoid daughter anymore. I was one woman talking to another who had already lived the ending I was trying to prevent. I knew exactly what movie my mother was in. I refused to let it play out the same way. If he thought he could run the same script one more time, he'd picked the wrong family. I didn't know exactly how I'd stop him yet. But for the first time, I knew I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. The next step was obvious. I needed a lawyer. Not Mr. Henderson. He'd already shown me where his loyalty stopped. My mother was his client, and as long as she signed the papers, he was going to process them. I needed someone whose job was to protect her from what she couldn't, or wouldn't, see. I found an attorney who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. Her name was Linda Reyes. Every review used the same two words, relentless and honest. Her office was small, no fancy lobby or fountain, just shelves of heavy books, a framed degree, and a plant that looked battle-tested. She shook my hand, firm and steady, and nodded toward the chair across from her desk. So, she said, tell me why you're here. I opened the binder I'd built, divorce records, property settlements, business documents, the amended will, and a page with Sarah's story in my messy handwriting. I think my mother is being targeted, I said. Then I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't give me the, you're overreacting, look I'd started to expect from people. She just took notes, asked for dates and spellings, and let me lay the whole twisted pattern out on the table. When I finally stopped talking, she sat back and tapped her pen against her pad. This is not a boyfriend problem, she said. This is a pattern. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So I'm not crazy, I said. Her mouth twitched. Maybe a little obsessed, she said. In your shoes, that's a skill. She flipped through the binder again. Here's the legal reality, she said. Your mother is an adult. Unless we can show she lacks capacity, she doesn't understand what she's signing, or that she's under undue influence. The law lets her make terrible choices with her own property. Undue influence, I repeated. In simple language, Linda said, it's when someone in a position of trust and intimacy slowly overrides her free will. It's not enough that he's rude or that you hate him. We have to show manipulation, isolation, control, and a clear financial benefit to him. I pointed at the page with the ex-wives. Is this a pattern? I asked. She nodded slowly. This, she said, tapping the names and dates, is exactly what judges pay attention to. Widows. Inherited businesses. Quick marriages. Asset transfers. Presented right, this stops looking like romance and starts looking like a business plan. So what do we do? I asked. Can we stop this? Maybe, she said. But we have to move fast. She laid out the plan like a surgeon explaining a risky operation. First, document everything. Every account my mother had before him. Every change since he arrived. Every new loan, every new signature. Second, talk to my mother, but not as the nagging daughter. With Linda there is a neutral third party. Sometimes, she said, hearing about risk from a stranger in a blazer lands differently than hearing it from your kid. I swallowed, because I knew how much my mother hated being told she was wrong. And if she won't listen? I asked. Then we look at what the court gives us, Linda said. We might challenge the trust, ask to annul the marriage on grounds of fraud or undue influence, or in a worst-case scenario, seek some protective arrangement. Words like guardianship and conservatorship hung in the air between us. You're talking about asking a judge to say my mother can't manage her own life, I said. I'm talking about not ruling anything out yet, she replied. Best case, she sees the pattern, throws him out herself, and we clean up the damage. Worst case, you watch her lose everything and wish you'd pushed harder. I thought of Sarah's voice saying she kept the shame and the debt, and he kept the money. Okay, I said. Then we don't let it get there. Linda nodded. I'll send a letter requesting a meeting with your mother. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Save every email. Screenshot texts. Write down every conversation. Paper is boring, she added, but judges love boring. She closed the binder and slid it back to me. And Emily? You're not just protecting a bank balance. You're protecting your mother from becoming the next Sarah. Don't let him turn you into a bystander. On my way out, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I didn't look like a hero. I looked like a tired woman carrying too many documents and not enough sleep. But for the first time since that conference room with Mr. Henderson, I felt something solid under my feet. This wasn't just grief and anger anymore. This was a case. My father always said courts listen to paper. I'd tried shouting feelings, and no one wanted to hear them. So fine. If paper was what it took to protect what he built, then I was done begging. It was time to let the documents talk. By the time Linda's letter went out, I already knew a polite sit-down wasn't going to fix this. My mother ignored the first call from her office. Then the second. When the assistant finally got her on the phone, she said she was too busy and that her husband handled all that now. So we picked a different strategy. No ambush in a courtroom. A confrontation in the one place Richard thought he'd already won, my father's house. I watched their routine for a week. His car in the driveway by 9. Groceries on Tuesdays. Bank on Fridays. Thursday morning, I drove over with the binder on the seat beside me. My hands weren't shaking this time. They felt steady in a way that scared me a little. I stood at the front door I'd walked through my whole life and realized I didn't know what version of my mother was going to answer. The one who raised me, or the one who parroted his lines back at me. I rang the bell instead of using my key. A small thing, but it felt right. A few seconds later, the door opened just enough for my mom to look out. Her face softened for half a heartbeat when she saw me, then shut down again. "What are you doing here?" she asked. No hug. No, "Hi, honey. I want to show you something," I said, holding up the binder. "Give me 5 minutes. If you still want me gone after that, I'll leave." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. Before she could answer, his voice floated in from the hallway. "Is there a problem, Richard?" "Of course." He appeared behind her with that same easy smile, one hand resting on her shoulder like he owned it. "I thought I made it clear you're not welcome here," he said. I ignored him and kept my eyes on my mother. 5 minutes, I repeated quietly. "If I'm wrong, you can slam the door in my face." Maybe it was the way I said it. Maybe it was the fact I didn't sound like I was begging anymore. She opened the door wider. 5 minutes, she murmured. In the living room. Richard started to object, but she shot him a look. Even under all the fog, a piece of her was still in there. We sat exactly where we'd sat after my dad's funeral, only this time there was a stranger on the couch. I put the binder on the coffee table and opened it to the first tab. "I'm not here to talk about my feelings," I said. "I'm here to show you paper. You can like him and still read this." The first page was a simple timeline. My father's date of death. The day she met Richard. The day he moved in. The wedding. The trust. Next to it, in a different color, were 3 more timelines. Same pattern. Different women. "These are public records," I said. "Filed long before he met you." I pointed to the first name. Susan. House in her name before marriage. After divorce, he walks with cash, she walks with a brand new mortgage. Second line. Jennifer. Rental properties. After him? Loans, liquidations, restructuring. Third line. Sarah. Family business. Liquidated. She kept the debt. Richard let out a short laugh. "You've been busy," he said. "You know, stalking people is not a good look." I didn't bother looking at him. I didn't stalk anyone. I read what they signed. The same way you read what my mother signed. I flipped to the next page, where the trust language sat next to theirs. My mother's eyes were on the paper now. Her fingers trembled as she traced one of the dates. "This doesn't mean anything," Richard said quickly. "People get divorced. Businesses fail. You can twist anything if you try hard enough." "Cool," I said. "Then you won't mind if someone else tells her their version." I pulled out my phone and put it on speaker. 1 ring. 2. On the 3rd, Sarah picked up. "Hey," she said. "This a good time?" I glanced at my mother. "Yeah," I said. "You're on speaker. My mother's here. So is Richard." For the first time since I walked in, he went very still. There was a small silence, then Sarah exhaled. "All right," she said. "Then I'll keep it simple." She told the short version. Church after her father's funeral. Groceries on the porch. Him saying, "You're too smart to be alone, and you deserve a partner who understands business." My mother flinched at the wording. "He said the same thing to you," she whispered. "It wasn't to me. It was to the floor." Sarah kept going. How he suggested joint accounts, to make things easier. How he made her feel guilty for asking about statements. How, by the end, her name was on the loans and his was on the cash. "I'm not calling to relive it," Sarah said. "I'm calling so you don't have to." Her voice hardened. "Ma'am, if he's telling you you're paranoid, ungrateful, or greedy because you have questions, that's the same script he used on me. It ends with you broke and him shopping for his next widow." My mother's face had gone the color of copy paper. Richard finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," he said, standing up. "You don't have to listen to this trash. She's bitter. She lost a court case and now she wants revenge." The word revenge hung there like a bad smell. I stood too, but kept my tone level. "I brought this to an elder law attorney," I said. "She sees this kind of pattern for a living. She used two phrases you should probably get familiar with: undue influence and financial exploitation. Neither of those play well in front of a judge." I turned back to my mother. "I can't make you do anything," I said. "But I promised Dad I'd protect what he built. And I am not going to sit here and watch you become the next line in his timeline." My voice cracked on Dad, but I didn't look away. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then my mother did something I hadn't seen in months. She moved away from him. Not much. Just one step closer to me, one step out of the shadow of his shoulder. It was small. It was everything. "Richard," she said quietly, "is any of this true?" He didn't answer. He didn't have a good lie left. His silence was louder than anything Sarah or I could have said. My mother's shoulders sagged, then squared. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet but clear. "I want you out," she said. He blinked. "You don't mean that," he said. "You're upset. She's manipulating you." "We can talk about this," I said. My mother repeated, louder now, "I want you out of my house. Today. Take whatever is yours and go." For once, he had no script. Just anger twisting his features. He muttered something about lawyers and regret and stormed down the hall. A few minutes later, the front door slammed. The echo rang through the house like a bad spirit finally shaken loose. Sarah's voice came softly through the phone. "I'm still here," she said. "You did the hard part." The weeks that followed weren't neat or cinematic. They were paperwork and phone calls and long, exhausted meetings in Linda's small office. My mother brought in every statement she could find. We spread them across the table and traced the damage. We were lucky. He'd started, but he hadn't finished. Linda filed motions. She used words I'd seen on websites and in statutes but never thought would apply to my family. Fraud. Undue influence. Elder financial abuse. She attached Sarah's affidavit and the records from the other divorces. Suddenly, Richard's private life wasn't so private anymore. In the end, the marriage didn't survive the light. Under pressure, with ex-wives willing to testify, he backed off rather than risk a full trial. The trust was undone, the accounts restored. My father's shop and house came back under the structure he'd intended. On paper, at least, the damage was mostly repaired. Last I heard, Richard was busy explaining himself to investigators in another state. I didn't need the details. Knowing he'd finally hit a wall he couldn't charm his way through was enough. Consequences don't always look like handcuffs. Sometimes they look like doors quietly closing in every direction. Fixing the money was the easy part. The hard part was fixing us. The first time my mother suggested we go to a grief group together, I almost said no on instinct. I was tired of being the responsible one, the planner, the person with the binder. But she didn't ask me to organize it. She just asked me to come. We sat in a circle with strangers who knew more about loss than most people ever should. My mother spoke in a small voice about losing her husband and almost losing her daughter on top of it. I talked about making a promise in a hospital room and feeling like I'd failed it before I'd even started. Later, in a therapist's office with softer chairs and too many tissue boxes, we learned how to talk without Richard's shadow in the room. She apologized for calling me greedy, for treating my concern like an attack. I apologized for the times I let my fear come out sideways as anger. We made new rules. She would loop me in on big decisions, not because she was incapable, but because it made us both feel safer. I would ask questions without assuming the worst. She would listen without assuming I was trying to control her. We promised to say when something felt off before it turned into a secret. Sometimes we argue. We're human. Sometimes she still misses him, not Richard, but the fantasy of not being alone. Grief doesn't vanish just because you catch the man who tried to monetize it. But now, when she says, "I'm lonely," I don't hear an accusation. I hear a need we can name and work around together. If there's one thing I took from all of this, it's that grief is a crack predators can see from a mile away. They love widows, only children, families in shock. They count on us being too polite, too trusting, too broken to ask for paperwork or push back when something feels wrong. My father asked me to protect what he built. I thought that meant guarding numbers on spreadsheets and deeds in a safe. It turned out to mean standing between my mother and a man who saw her as a balance sheet with a pulse. It meant turning my fear into a file instead of a fight. We didn't get through this because I made the best speech or won some dramatic showdown. We got through it because, in the end, paper spoke louder than charm. Patterns mattered. Other women's stories mattered. And once my mother saw herself in them, she couldn't unsee it. I used to think calculated consequences sounded cold. Now, it feels like justice. Richard calculated what he thought he could take. He forgot to calculate what happens when the people he underestimates compare notes. When they stop arguing feelings and start presenting evidence. My father's house is still standing. The shop is still open. My mother and I are still here, learning how to talk to each other without anyone else's script in our mouths. I couldn't stop the wound from happening. But in the end, I kept the promise. I didn't let her give it away.